Really appreciate the thank you. Appreciate the opportunity to bring to you this discussion of a novel therapy in Bimzelx. Bimzelx has arrived. Thank you to UCB and their team for being here and bringing this amazing therapeutic to our toolbox for managing our patients with moderate to severe plaque psoriasis. So Bimzelx is indicated for the treatment of moderate to severe plaque psoriasis in adults who are candidates for systemic or phototherapy. And that's pretty much the typical indication for our biologics that we have in our toolbox. This is a promotional talk. I will stay on label. I'm here on behalf of the company, and I will be compensated for the presentation. Bimzelx has had a remarkable global impact, as you all know. That took a little bit of extra time for this therapeutic to come to market. But on the other hand, one of the benefits for that, and for us here in this room, is that we have a lot of clinical trial data and a lot of efficacy data. 5 phase 3 clinical trials. It is approved for moderate severe plaque psoriasis by 11 regulatory authorities around the world, including in 40 countries. More than 6 years of clinical trial use and over 4,800 post-marketing exposure patient years. Bimzelx is proven to consistently provide rapid, complete, and sustained clearance for more patients from the very first dose. And I think one of the things that you're going to see is really kind of for the first time ever, when we look at the data and we look at a data point like an absolute PASI score after just one dose, which is 2 injections with this therapeutic, you will see that about 80% mean improvement of the absolute PASI score, which is a response that we actually not quite seen previously with other therapeutics. So with bimekizumab, Bimzelx, we will see rapid response, complete clearance, maintained clearance up to 3 years, consistent safety, convenient dosing, and there's a program called the Navigate program for which we can achieve success with access for our patients in getting a therapeutic. And of course, that's crucial. When we see a product that works so effectively, it's important that we're able to get it very easily. I have a lot of clinical trial data to present, but you're going to see a lot of consistency in the results. The high bar primary endpoints for these clinical trials were PASI 90 responses and clear or minimal diseases. So you see the Be Ready trial, which is the landmark pivotal trials that led to the approval of the drug compared to placebo. We have the Be Vivid trial compared head-to-head with ustekinumab, and the Be Sure trial, Bimzelx versus adalimumab. We see consistent responses where PASI 90 responses are concerned, where we haven't the 90%, 85 to 90% of the subjects in these clinical trials are able to achieve this very high bar. To the left, you see the PASI 90 responses. To the right, you see clear or minimal disease responses. Look at the deltas in the placebo-controlled trials, about a 90% delta, remarkable responses. About 1.5 times more effective or more compared to ustekinumab, as you see in these PASI 90 responses, and as well, same for the Be Sure trial, bimekizumab, Bimzelx versus adalimumab. For me, when I look at this data, it tells me that we have really come a very long way in our ability to significantly improve the skin, and we will talk about completely clear skin in looking at PASI 100 scores, as we have here in this head-to-head data versus secukinumab. For the first time within the same class, 2 drugs were compared head-to-head with the high bar of completely clear skin by PASI 100 using a non-responder imputation, the most stringent statistical analysis. And we see in the standard dosing regimen for both therapeutics, which for Bimzelx is 260 milligram syringe or auto-injector, 320 milligrams at week 0, every 4 weeks thereafter, up to 16 weeks, and the standard dosing is every 8 weeks thereafter. This was against the standard dosing regimen with induction doses, 5 of them for secukinumab, as we normally see, where 62% of the subjects in the Bimzelx group were able to achieve clear skin versus just under 50% in the secukinumab group. And very similar responses, very similar differences between these 2 drugs numerically as we look at clear skin by investigators' global assessment. Bimzelx was evaluated in a large number of patients, over 2,200. And one of the unique things about this trial compared to others, not only given its large size, but among the subjects, there were significant numbers of individuals that were exposed to other biologic therapies, including over 50% that were previously exposed to anti-IL-17 inhibitors, over 40% previously exposed to anti-TNF inhibitors, 16% 12/23 inhibitors, and about 14% IL-23 inhibitors. A smaller number of IL-23 inhibitors, but we would have expected that based on the timing for which these studies were done. This is the first and only biologic that approved that inhibits the very important inflammatory cytokines known as interleukin-17A and F, and we'll dig into that right now. In looking at the inflammatory pathways for psoriatic skin disease, we know that the inflammatory pathway in psoriasis is driven by IL-17A and IL-17F production, and we know this happens from both innate and adaptive immune responses. We also know that IL-17A and IL-17F production doesn't just come from the typical IL-23 sources, but it comes from IL-23 independent sources like innate lymphoid cells and also gamma theta T cells and several other sources that drive the production of these inflammatory cytokines, specifically IL-17A and IL-17F. IL-17A and IL-17F, we know, are key drivers of the inflammatory burden that our patients have who have plaque psoriasis. IL-17A and IL-17F are 50% homologous. We also know that IL-17F is more abundantly expressed in psoriatic lesions, more so than IL-17F. And while we know, versus IL-17A, while we know that IL-17A plays a critical role in the treatment as a target for our patients with psoriasis, we also know that IL-17F appears to be much more abundant and a more specific target for treating our patients. We also know that IL-17 as a cytokine has very specific dimers, IL-17AA, IL-17AF, and IL-17F. These play a critical role not only in the inflammatory burden in psoriasis, but we know that the way that Bimzelx works is by targeting IL-17A and IL-17F. And the IL-17A inhibitors that we have in our toolbox are rather specific for the dimers of IL-17AA and IL-17AF, but not specifically IL-17FF. And this may be responsible for the significant reduction in inflammatory burden that we see in our patients with plaque psoriasis, and perhaps relates to the high-level responses that we see in patients going on Bimzelx. And speaking of such, let's look at the rapid responses that we can see in patients going on this therapeutic. Consistent results have been seen across 3 phase 3 trials and also 1 phase 3b clinical trial. And as I referenced before, from the very first dose, we see about an 80% mean improvement of the absolute PASI score just after the very first dose. And what's interesting is that we see this in all the clinical trials. It's really very consistent data. Here are the PASI 90 results that we see demonstrated, where about 4 out of 10 subjects in the clinical trials, whether we're looking at the phase 3b study in Be Radiant, which is the head-to-head comparison with secukinumab, Be Ready, Be Vivid, and also Be Sure, very consistent results between 36 and 45% of the subjects are able to achieve PASI 90 responses really just after 1 dose. This therapeutic works rapidly. And again, if we look at the mean improvement of the absolute PASI score just after 1 dose in comparison to 4 doses of secukinumab, to 1 dose of ustekinumab, and looking at the other therapeutics, also looking at versus placebo, regardless of the trial, there's at least an 80% mean improvement of the absolute PASI score just after those 2 160 milligram subcutaneous doses. In the therapeutics that we have in our toolbox right now, we have never seen such a high level response compared to some of the other therapeutics, where about 50+% of our subjects are able to get a 50% mean improvement of the absolute PASI score after 1 dose with some of our other therapeutics. Usually takes a couple of doses of some of our other therapeutics. Let's look at complete clearance. You know, when I think of a head-to-head trial between a drug like Bimzelx and a drug like secukinumab, and I think of the launch of IL-17 inhibitors, we used to say to our patients that we could get your skin clearer. But with a therapeutic like Bimzelx, it's pretty easy to say that I can get your skin clear. So let's look at the data for completely clear skin. And again, you're going to see consistency of responses where about 2/3 of the subjects across the board are able to achieve completely clear skin as measured by PASI 100 responses. Here's the data. Once again, you're going to see consistency. 62% of the subjects in the B-Radiant trial versus 49% in those receiving secukinumab, B-Ready versus placebo. 68% of the subjects achieving clear skin by PASI 100 versus just 1% in the placebo group. And again, these consistent responses, just about 60% both in B-Vivid and B-Sure versus the comparator groups in ustekinumab and adalimumab, about 2.5 times likely to achieve this high bar of PASI 100 compared to these very high-level therapeutics in ustekinumab and previously the market leader in adalimumab. So once again, when I look at this data, it expresses to me that we have really come a very long way and we have highly effective drugs in the toolbox. Once again, redundancy on my part, but consistency of data. If you look at the phase 3B trial, the head-to-head comparison between Bimzelx and secukinumab, and then B-Ready, B-Vivid, and B-Sure versus placebo versus ustekinumab and adalimumab, about 85% of the subjects were able to consistently achieve PASI 90 responses. It's nice to see what happens in a control period, but what happens long term? We want to be able to tell our patients that are responding, can you continue to respond? What will happen at the end of 1 year? What will happen at the end of 2 years? And despite the fact that Bimzelx was just approved in October of this year, so we're getting close to about a year, we would not expect to have data that is 3 years worth of data, and we're going to look at 3 years worth of data. And the open label extension focused primarily on safety, but on the other hand, I will be able to show you the sustainability of the response, the maintenance of the response of Bimzelx out to 3 years. In the B-Radiant trial, 67% of patients were able to achieve complete clearance. Again, you'll see this over and over again from the data. And in the B-Sure trial, 70% of patients receiving Bimzelx were able to achieve this very high bar as well and hold this response of PASI 100 after a transition from weekly dosing to then every 8-week dosing. Once again, the drug is front-loaded at every 4-week dosing up to 16 weeks and every 8 weeks thereafter, just as a reminder. Here's additional data from the B-Radiant trial. We see just after 1 dose, we have 36% of the subjects very quickly within that first month being able to get to PASI 90 and 14% after just the 1 dose with completely clear skin. As we look over time out to week 16, and we've seen some of this data already, 62% of the subjects able to achieve clear skin. This is statistically significant differences versus secukinumab. And more important, if we go out further to 48 weeks, as we see here, we get additional capture. We get a 5% capture rate, and again, about 2/3 of the subjects. And here we see 2/3 of the subjects in the B-Radiant trial with clear skin by PASI 100. And again, that consistent PASI 90 percentage at just about 85% of the subjects achieving also that very high bar. And here are the comparator arms and some of this data we've really seen in other forms. I think this slide is very important because from this data, from the B-Sure trial, and we look at PASI 100 responses that go out over 1 year, whether we look at every 4-week dosing or we look at 4-week dosing up to 16 weeks, which is the front-loaded induction period, and then every 8-week dosing thereafter, it doesn't look like it really matters very much because the rate of capture of subjects in the clinical trial were consistently here at 70% of the subjects with clear skin after 1 year and more than 1 year in that one particular trial. As I said, control periods are great. 1-year data is great, but what about maintenance of clearance over time? If we look at the responders at week 16 that were able to achieve PASI 100, 82% of those responders at week 16 were able to maintain that response up to 3 years. We know this from the B-Bright study design that we see here. This is the open label extension. The primary focus of the open label extension, as we see with many trials, is focused on safety, but as well, we will look at the efficacy data as well. We see that those individuals in the 3 trials, Be Vivid, Be Ready, and Be Sure, were offered the opportunity to enter into the open label extension, and we see this is a pretty straightforward study design, 320 milligrams every 4 weeks, a continuum in an arm of such, the same, also every 8 weeks, and also the every 8-week arm being able to cross over to receive either every 4-week dosing or every 8-week dosing. And it's important to point out the success of this product is exemplified by the fact that all of the individuals in the every 4-week crossing over to every 8 weeks, and those individuals that were every 4 weeks as well, all of those individuals entering into the open label extension all achieved PASI 90, which is pretty remarkable. And the question that will often get asked for our patients, I'm doing very well, can I continue to do well? And as I just said a couple of moments ago, those subjects in the clinical trial that were clear at week 16, 82% of them were able to maintain that response, whether they were in the group that was every 4 weeks to every 8 weeks or every 8 weeks throughout the studies. Again, consistency of data. Remember the 80% mean improvement to the absolute PASI score just after 1 dose. 2/3 achieving complete clearance in the control period. 7 out of 10, approximately 7 out of 10 achieving complete clearance in year 1, and we saw this in the Be Radiant and Be Sure trials. And again, we have 3 years of data here where 82% of the subjects that were 100% clear via PASI 100 at the end of 16 weeks were able to maintain that response over time. But what does rapid and complete and sustained clearance actually look like? And let's look at some clinical photos. This is an individual from the Be Vivid trial, 44-year-old, an absolute PASI score of 31. I will tell you the average score was about 20 in the clinical trial, a BSA of 61%. Now, we're not seeing the whole patient here, but look at the remarkable response. This is every 4-week dosing. This is an individual with a PASI 75 response after just 1 dose. Clear at the end of the control period at week 16 and maintaining that response after a total of 13 doses, which is the number of doses in the first year. There are 9 doses when you go into year 2. Remember, there's that induction period of 4 weeks. Here's another individual with an absolute PASI score of 38.7, a BSA of over 3/4 of their body, achieving a PASI 75 response after just 1 dose very quickly within that first dose. And remember that 80%, this models even an 80% mean improvement to the absolute PASI score from baseline, 4 doses at week 16, and then after 12 doses, clear after week 16, and also up to week 48. And this is Bimzelx at 320 milligrams every 4 weeks, a female patient about 44 years old. It's pretty clear in reviewing this data that this drug works. But as we like to ask, like from the movie Marathon Man, is it safe? And I'm here to tell you that it is a safe therapy. We're going to look at short-term data for safety and longer-term data that, again, goes out about 3 years, as we were able to get from the Be-Bright trial. 3 double-blinded trials with 989 subjects, 1,789 individuals across 6 double-blinded trials and 2 open-label trials, over 4,200 patient years with a range of 1 to over 1,300 days of exposure. All that type of data is important when we look at adverse events in clinical trials and safety. And here, when we look at the incidence rates of adverse events that we would be concerned about, they're generally low rates, ones that we would expect in a population of psoriasis patients when we're talking about serious infections. In general, patients can develop serious infections in clinical trials and in practice, and even those individuals who are not on systemic therapies. We saw a couple of cases of new onset inflammatory bowel disease. The adjudicated MACE, again, these incidence rates are low and fall below what we would expect in a population of psoriasis patients and a population of treated psoriasis patients, and that also goes for hypersensitivity reactions. And in this data set for safety, what we do see of significance when we compare it to placebo and even the incidence rates for long-term, up to 3 years, are really just for injection site reactions, which we'll see in clinical trials for psoriasis. When we inhibit IL-17 as a cytokine, and it appears when we inhibit IL-17 A and F, we will see some candidiasis. Candidiasis is something that we see with other immunomodulatory therapies, and we see it sometimes when we use antibiotic therapy. We know how to treat this. In the control period, we saw a rate of about 9% of candidiasis. Most of the cases were oral candidiasis. You see here it's about 7.6%. And when we look at all doses of Bimzelx and we look at long-term safety data, the rate is about 11% overall and about 10.2% for those cases of oral candidiasis. Now, when we think of candidiasis, we might say, well, in a clinical trial, how many people discontinued? And when we think of 1,789 individuals, when we look at all doses of Bimzelx, there were 8 people that discontinued. That is 0.4%. That is a very low rate of discontinuations. One event of candidiasis was experienced by the majority of the subjects in the clinical trials. Most were oral candidiasis. These were treated quite efficiently with either nystatin or combinations of nystatin and oral fluconazole. And the median treatment duration of antifungal therapies was about 12 days for those cases of oral candidiasis. We do see hepatic events in clinical trials for biologic therapies. There is a call out here for liver function abnormalities, but these rates, these incidence rates for liver function abnormalities are rather typical for populations of psoriasis patients and psoriasis patients in clinical trials. And many of these patients, as I talked about comorbidities in my CME talk on psoriatic arthritis and psoriatic disease previously, we will see that individuals in the background here may have conditions like metabolic associated liver disease or fatty liver disease. During the clinical trials, the control period for BVID and BREDI, the liver serum transaminase levels at about 3 times the upper limit of normal occurred in about 1.0% of subjects with Bimzelx, and it wasn't 0 in the placebo group. It's versus 6% in the placebo group. In the individuals with elevated transaminase, these were generally not clinically relevant, and they resolved during continued treatment or after discontinuation of Bimzelx. When we are treating these patients, we typically will check liver functions at baseline as part of our comprehensive workup for these patients. And it is suggested that if we see a patient who may have any presentation that might make us think of any kind of liver condition, then we might check liver function tests periodically. In my experience thus far in utilizing this therapy, that this has not been necessary. If we look at additional adverse events of interest, there's adjudicated suicidal ideation behavior, which is a call out. We've seen this previously with a different therapeutic. It is 0 in the control period. It is 0.1 for all doses of Bimzelx. For the Food and Drug Administration, and here in the United States, this is the only place in the world, inclusive of all 40 countries, where this drug is approved, where this call out has been given. Leave it to the FDA. But what I will say that's important for reassurance purposes for our patients, we counsel them all the time about the background comorbidities that exist. 20 to 30% of patients with plaque psoriasis have background anxiety and depression. During the 16-week placebo-controlled trial of BREDI and BVIVID, there were higher rates of suicidal ideation that were reported in Bimzelx-treated subjects. There was 1 completed suicide that was reported in the open-label extension study. That was after over 700 days of exposure, by the way. Per the FDA, there is no causal association between the treatment of Bimzelx and the increased risk of suicidal ideation and behavior that has been established. And the overall rate of SIB across the psoriasis clinical trials was 0.13 per 100 patient years. That means if you treated 100 patients in a year, that would be just above 1/10 of a human being, just so that you all know. But as we always do, we always want to weigh risk and benefit. These rates that I reference here, just for your own comfort level, actually fall in line with groups of psoriasis-treated patients in general. And in a population of psoriasis patients, the range of rate of suicidal ideation behavior is about 0.09 to 0.54 per 100 patient years as we look at other populations of patients that are treated with biologics who have plaque psoriasis. That 0.13 falls very nicely in line with what we would expect in a population treated with biologic therapies, including Bimzelx. This is the first and only IL-17A and F antagonist indicated for the treatment of moderate severe plaque psoriasis. We've gone over the information regarding safety for suicidal ideation behavior. We counsel all of our patients regarding the possibilities of infection when they go on biologic therapies that blunt those cytokines that are responsible for the inflammatory changes that we see in plaque psoriasis. We screen all of our patients for tuberculosis, as we talked about, Dr. Armstrong talked about today. By far and away, it is with quantiferon gold. I just went over the liver function discussion and the idea of checking liver functions at baseline, which we typically do in our evaluations with patients for psoriatic disease that are going to undergo a biologic therapy. In individuals with known inflammatory bowel disease, we would tend to avoid IL-17 inhibitors, including Bimzelx, but there was a low rate of inflammatory bowel disease with a couple of cases that were reported that I referenced previously. All live vaccines are administered before any immunomodulatory therapy, and the most common adverse events in the clinical trials at around 1% or greater were upper respiratory tract infections, oral candidiasis, headaches, injection site reactions, tinea infections, gastroenteritis, HSV, acne folliculitis, and we referenced the candida infections, and we did see some cases of fatigue, albeit low. Convenient dosing, 1 dose every 4 weeks, up to 16 weeks, and then 1 dose every 8 weeks thereafter. It comes available as a syringe or a pen. Remember, each dose is 160 milligrams. Individuals will be receiving 2 doses with every singular dose. The access support I alluded to before with the Navigate program provides rapid access, affordability, 1 point of contact, and a significant number of online resources for our patients to be able to receive Bimzelx. It's the first and only approved biologic therapy that selectively targets IL-17A and F. And remember that A and F, and think of the word transformative, because the A and the F is in that word of transformative. And through my lenses, this is one of the most transformative therapies that we've really ever seen. Rapid responses, complete clearance, maintenance of response up to 3 years, as we saw with the data previously, consistent safety profile, and convenient dosing, as we talked about. And so with that, Mr. Gorelick, I am finished. I'm around to answer any questions that you may have. Thank you.